Hi. It's been a while. Some cobwebs up there. Let me get those for you. What's my intro again? Hi. My name is Cheyenne, and I talk about whatever I want. And it's been a very long time. My point is, here I am, back and ready to go. So, elephant in the room. There are a ton of Alexa Nicholas and Christy Romano updates, which I have missed over the past however many months that I've been gone. I think I want to make a 1-year retrospective of the Quiet on Set documentary and like all the fallout and everything that happened from that. And then the Alexa and Christy updates at the year point of when the documentary came out last year. So in the next couple of months, I think that's when I'm gonna make the video. I also want to wait and see if more happens, because currently we still don't really know what's happening with Podco. But anyway, just spoiler alert, I guess, isn't it crazy how Alexa became exactly what she was criticizing Christy for? I feel like I should have seen that coming, but I was really duped. We'll definitely be addressing that more in the future, but if you don't want to wait for me, the YouTuber Ofidoki has made a ton of videos about the Alexa Nicholas stuff, and I was actually featured in one of the videos about Ned's Declassified podcast being canceled and just kind of like trying to figure out what's happening with Podco. I was in that video. It surprised me because I was just watching the video normally. Ofi's channel got recommended to me when they started uploading videos about the topic because I had already uploaded my videos about them, and it just got pushed into my recommended. So, and then I'm just sitting here one day and my face and my name is on the screen. It was very weird. Was not expecting that at all. But if you like my videos, you'll definitely like Ofidoki's videos, any video, not just the Alexa stuff, but anything over there. So go check that out. And yeah, anyway, sorry. Today though, we are going to talk about 2024, the year of misogyny, and just like the state of feminism overall. How did we get here? What are we gonna do about everything that's going on? I don't really know, but maybe we'll have a little bit of hope by the end of this video. I don't know. One of my hottest takes, and I've talked about this on Twitter before, is that men are not naturally allied to women. Now, you have to be careful with that statement because you can get into some weird gender essentialism type of stuff, and that's not what I mean by that. No turf business on this channel ever. But because of how ingrained misogyny is in our society, not just our society in America, but societies all over the world, what we see as like the natural state of man is to be antagonistic towards women. It's important that we recognize that it is changeable. It's not like because you're born with XY chromosomes, you will be antagonistic towards anybody with XX chromosomes. That's gender essentialism. That's weird. That's not what we're talking about. It just does not benefit men to be allied to women in society, so why would they do it is kind of where I'm coming from. So when there are men who don't want to be contributing to the patriarchy and toxic masculinity and all of that, there has to be really active work done in order to make those changes in a proper way. And I guess some people might argue like, oh, men have this natural urge to be protective, which is also kind of weird. But I would argue, I would counter that by saying, do men have that natural protective urge when it's not a woman that they don't feel ownership over? So humans have been conditioned to see ourselves in this very rigid gender binary, and that gender binary influences the way that we all interact with the world and everything else. And this is also an anti-capitalist channel, so we're gonna have to talk about misogyny and capitalism and colonization and how those all come together to make America, basically, and other colonial powers or colonial states, I guess, in the world. So if this title of the video is Why Are Men?, we're going to explore that a little bit. So misogyny is not unique to capitalism and the subsequent colonization at the hands of capitalism. So I'm not saying that they can be separated, but a lot of times you'll find them together. Anytime you see a society, whether it is capitalist or any time before capitalism in history, if you see a society that is very focused on militarism, they will typically have more rigid gender roles. Also, if they have like very strong class divides, there's typically going to be stronger gender roles in those societies as well. So in the Americas, there were a few tribes that kind of fit that bill, but by and large, the majority, that's not the norm. Unlike capitalism, non-hierarchical cultures saw things more equal, where women and children are not the property of men, whereas in capitalism, that's kind of where you get that idea. But that idea of women and children being the property of men wasn't even like really common in Europe until that 1500s, 1600s, 1700s era. And before that, you have feudalism, and then before that, you have communities that are kind of like sharing communities, I guess, is a way to easily describe it to people, because it's kind of hard to conceptualize what that looks like as an adult in America today. So I think a lot of people, when they think of what the opposite of capitalism is, they assume it's like nobody owns everything, you know, a very like in Soviet Russia, you know, those jokes, whatever. That was such a millennial reference, oh my god. It's not true in the way that we understand what ownership means, like the average person understands what ownership means. So if you think of these sharing communities as like a healthy family dynamic, maybe you have your own family dynamic to draw from, can't relate, but if you think about like your classical healthy family unit dynamic, everyone's contributing to the household, but they also like have their own thing going on, their own possessions, those personal belongings, their own stuff. Also, it would be like today if everyone in your apartment complex were sharing the resources in the apartment without having to pay, but you also had your own room that's locked, it's like your space and stuff like that. So it's not like everything that's mine is yours. It's more like we're sharing these resources and we're making collective decisions about how to utilize those resources. That's what that is in a very simplistic way. So then you get feudalism, you get the concept of landlords that springs up. And so you still kind of have a shared society where people are sharing these resources, but in these little communities, you're also now having to pay this landlord person. And again, oversimplified, but then the way how capitalism comes into being is those landlords, they want more power. So then we start to see that ruling class versus the working class and the dynamics between those two pop up during, again, like the 1500 to 1600 area in England specifically. Once that became what England was doing, capitalism, then colonialism and the England as a colonial power became way more powerful. It was very, very successful for them. England becomes this colonial juggernaut, and as English colonization is expanding around the world, so is capitalism. Like I said, the English become so much better at colonizing than all of the other world powers at the time. Like the Dutch, they were like the ones for colonization before all of this. They were going in Asia and Africa and like taking over all this stuff. They like started the spice wars and all that. But then they started losing power once England, you know, was getting more powerful. So all of the other world powers started to model this capitalistic model that England was adopting to reach the same success that they saw that England was doing. So capitalism and colonialism are very intimately linked in our history of the world, especially here in America. Capitalism is giving colonialism the fuel it needs to spread across the world like wildfire, like it has. So the private property that's been invented as a tool of capitalism is a little bit different, like I said, than what the average person is going to think of as private property, which is what makes anti-capitalist conversations so difficult, because people can't understand what that means. Capitalism, private property, means the legal right of individuals and private entities to own resources, goods, land, and they're able to use, control, and transfer that as they see fit, which again, at its core doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal, but private property under capitalism looks like, and it's not limited to these things, but turning land into a commodity to exploit, using slavery in a way that the world had not seen thus far, and using pseudo-scientific means to do so, racial superiority to kind of like justify it in their mind. They normalize that domestic labor is free, it's unpaid, even though domestic labor is extremely important for capitalism to survive in the first place. Domestic labor, we're talking about you need to eat and sleep and all the stuff that you're doing at home to fuel you for going to your job. But all that is free and underappreciated and largely done by women. And also the creation of the patriarchy under capitalism, which turns the bodies of women and children, like I said, into commodities. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So like, you could literally make an iceberg diagram of what people think private property means and then what it actually means under capitalism. And under here, under the waterline, is all the things that capitalists steal from the working class in order to generate and maintain profit. That's what they mean by private property. So anyway, the patriarchy, by way of capitalism and colonialism, was brought to indigenous communities as a way to save them. Colonizers were threatened by the role that women held in these communities because of how equal it was. Gender equality threatened capitalism at its very core. And so to them, it must be eradicated. Patriarchy, again, this is another important point to make, is not just something that affects cis women. Patriarchy also upholds the nuclear family as an idea, which you probably know is a tool of capitalism as well. And this means also that a patriarchal society is going to be homophobic, it's going to be transphobic. The patriarchy is going to falsely assert that there are only two genders or sexes, whichever one they want to use at the time, even though that is debunked by science. It also tells us that monogamy is the only relationship and family structure to aspire to. Patriarchy, like I've been mentioning, also sees children as property, so everything that exploits children, all of the issues that we have about that center around the exploitation of children, is stemming from patriarchy. Because under capitalism, having children is simply the creation of the next generation of laborers. And so our treatment in this country and other capitalist countries is going to mirror those ideals. And it has historically, as we've seen with the treatment of children in our country. Patriarchy also holds up white supremacy because of the ties to colonization, but that's like a whole other tangent that I can go down. This video is mostly and mainly at the same time. This video is mostly about like violence against women and the reaction in the media and how the general population consumes that reaction, so we don't have to go down this part. But I just wanted to address that patriarchy, the term, is way bigger than most people would think of when they think of the term patriarchy. And just because we're honing in on this one aspect of the patriarchy today doesn't mean that none of this other stuff exists or is a problem or anything else. I think that's a lot of people get very narrow-minded when they're having these discussions, and they say, oh, feminism is dumb because it doesn't address this and this and this and this, when they're looking at it from a very narrow view and not for what it actually is. Science has been attempting to find reasons why violence happens, particularly violence against women, and there are a lot of studies and a lot of information out there to consume about these things, about intimate partner violence in particular. The UN recognizes, and a lot of official bodies recognize, violence against women as an international public health emergency. Specifically, the UN defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private. So while women are more likely to experience intimate partner violence, there is no demographic, whatever gender you are, whatever sexuality you are, that is immune to abusive dynamics and relationships. It can happen to anybody. So analyzing one of these dynamics of all the different types of relationships you can have based on gender and sexuality, again, because we're focusing in today on something that's very binary, just because of the nature of the studies and everything, doesn't mean that, again, these problems aren't also problems and that they don't exist. And because this topic just tends to be very heteronormative and cis-centric, again, due to how it's been studied and where we're at in society when it comes to binary. But anyway, finding out the why behind human actions is one of the biggest mysteries in life. And we are able to get some ideas through study. There's a lot of work being done there, but there's also only so much that we can do because conducting studies is complicated. Finding things or being able to test what you want to test in a way that fits the scientific method that's going to make it work so that you can get some answers. It's like kind of difficult for some of these broader concepts to break things down in that way, but it is something that can be done. And I think we're so drawn to finding out the why because we want to be able to get rid of these issues if we can. And so if you find out the why, hopefully you can figure out how to fix those issues. So I always have my main sources in my description box of the videos as kind of like a semi-informal bibliography, but there are a couple of, even if you don't check out any of the other sources, there are two articles in particular that I think are really important when it comes to having some kind of hope for the world, things that science is actually showing. One of them I'm going to talk about way later at the end of this video, but the first one is an article called An Examination of the Gender Inclusiveness of Current Theories of Sexual Violence in Adulthood, Recognizing Male Victims, Female Perpetrators, and Same-Sex Violence. So it's a piece in the journal Trauma, Violence, and Abuse, and this was published in 2016. And not only does it discuss how the topics that we're talking about might exclude non-traditional victims, like I mentioned before, male victims, non-hetero couples, non-monogamy couples, things like that. But what I got out of this in particular is it goes into all the major theories behind abuse. I want to tell you guys some of these working theories because we do know a lot less than we'd like about these things, but we know more than zero, which there are various biological theories that people attribute to being more likely to commit sexual violence and violence in general, but things like anger management, your attachment style, your ability to emotionally regulate. That is one of the theories. Empirical evidence supporting that stuff is limited. It's just something that's hard to test. Then there's also this bizarre competitive mating theory, which is very weird, meaning that like because we have this biological urge to mate, that is why sexual assault happens, which is criticized in this article because one, it doesn't have a lot of empirical evidence to support it either. Also, it's very cis heteronormative. It's also just like not very useful. So those are our nature theories. If we go to nurture, you specifically have the social learning theory that's talked about in this article, which states that you and your environment are interacting with each other to produce behaviors. There is a lot of empirical evidence about social learning theory and how that contributes to abusive behaviors. Most studies, though, are about general violence instead of specifically sexual violence. And then you have routine activity theory, which I remember learning about in one of my criminal justice classes, but it states that crimes have three components. You have a suitable victim, a motivated offender, and then the absence of a culpable guardian or witness or whatever. This is a sub theory of the overarching crime of opportunity theory, so which again is limited. This theory can get into victim blaming territory a little bit. Feminist theory behind sexual assault lies in power, not sexual desire. The article that was going through all of these theories does criticize this for being too centered on women being the type of victim. I disagree, just because feminism is more than that, although I understand that like mainstream feminism is definitely focusing on white women, so that's why people have that. So I think that while feminists are focused a lot on the power that men hold specifically in society, the decent feminists out there know that that power is going to be a motivator for any type of person, and you are rewarded in society for wielding that power. But really, most theories of like why violence happens combines a lot of these into their theories. Those are called integrated theories. That's a whole other thing that's talked about in the article. Basically, what I wanted to say is like this stuff is very highly studied, even though there are still a lot of improvements to make. We just have so much data and evidence about how abuse works, yet people are constantly questioned and not believed because it's easy to maintain the status quo. Even even well-meaning people do it every day. And all of this seems like a very cynical way to view the world, but for me, instead of feeling like all of this is insurmountable, I think it is important to acknowledge these things and dismantle them. If we as a society have created these norms, then we can certainly destroy them, not without a fight, however, and the people in power, so if we're talking about misogyny, men in power are integral into making that change because they hold out all the power. So that's when allyship does become very important. Just like you can't make segregation illegal in schools and then suddenly racism is cured. Like obviously that's not the case. Segregation in schools and other things that have happened in the history of America have ripple effects into children that are being born today that still affect them. So no matter what some people might try and tell you, racism didn't just disappear after these things were made illegal. And in the same way, women gaining more power in the workforce does not end misogyny. So if you're around my age, 29, the 2000s was extremely misogynistic and toxic culture to grow up in. I could make several videos about all of that. We had America's Next Top Model and like, it was just a crazy time. And that was the height of like celebrity, like paparazzi, like Britney, Lindsay Lohan, like all that stuff. It was a crazy time to be living in. There was also a very popular anti-feminist sentiment at the time. If you were a cool girl, you didn't care about all that stuff. And so as the 2010s happened, you could either continue down that path or if you're like me, you fall into your Tumblr radfem era, not with a TERF slant, weirdly enough. I've always been like, oh yeah, trans people. Like that has never been a question in my mind. So not that side of radfem Tumblr. In fact, that might have been a lot of the reason where I'm like, oh yeah, no, I can't go down this path, and then I found better sources. But anyway, the 2010s culminated into the Me Too movement. Over the 2010s, it feels like the body positivity movement is gaining major steps, even though there obviously is still a lot of pushback. You would have some progress being made in like the fashion industry and things like that. And then slut shaming is like, it's not cool to do that to people anymore. Like it feels like some progress is being made. But then the surrounding culture responded in the way that it always does whenever progress is made, Donald Trump is elected president in 2016. Brett Kavanaugh, soon after, enters the Supreme Court. Pickup artists around the country dust off their faux fur hats and start making TikToks and content about how much women suck and all this stuff. I'm looking at you, Rolla Tomasi. Roe v. Wade is overturned. Cosby got let out of jail. Diet culture is like becoming an all-time, like it's at an all-time high again. I feel like it seems like everything, all the progress that we've made is just crumbling and crashing down around us, and then Donald Trump will be president again very shortly. So, and then also something that was hugely influential in this whole like new wave of anti-feminism is the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. This was such an embarrassing moment for the internet. I didn't talk about it a lot because anything that anyone had to say at the time that was positive about Amber or negative about Johnny Depp would be crucified. Sometimes by people that you thought you like were always on the same page with politically. It was very weird to see. And I could make a whole video about that trial itself. That's not what I'm here for today. Because unfortunately this case is only the beginning, and now abusers are angry, they're retaliating, they don't want it to be cool to call them out anymore. And I think I've mentioned this before, but the podcast You're Wrong About has been like super influential to just like my overall worldview, especially like the old version with the original hosts. But it inspired my video about Lily Singh, which I recently just rewatched because I needed some inspiration to like, am I even good at this? Should I even try it? Ew, why is there a bug in here? It's literally the middle of winter. That video's banger. You should go watch it. I'm just saying. Anyway, Michael Hobbs, who was the former co-host on that podcast, wrote a piece about the Depp trial very close to it ending. And then when I read that at the time that the article came out, he wrote, I finally felt like I wasn't crazy. I'm like, finally, I feel like I'm seeing things. The Faux Moi subreddit was also a place where it felt like people were seeing things the same way that I was seeing them. And so that article is of course going to be below. I'm just going to summarize some parts because it's going to tie into some of the other topics that we're talking about today. I think you should read the whole thing, especially if you're hearing me say this about the trial and you're like, wait, how could you not be on Johnny Depp's side 100%? That article is going to explain why, and also I'm going to get into it a little bit here. So I think the article can be broken down into like 3 major points. One is that there's a ton of evidence to back up Amber's story, and also 2, her story is a tale that's old as time. It follows abuse dynamics that we've seen over and over and over and over and over again. And finally, that this trial, the media coverage surrounding it was just a masterclass in victim blaming. And many people, like I said, maybe even some of you watching this video, fell for it completely and unquestionably. Because like I said, it was like even people that you trusted or thought you could trust were having this same sentiment. It was very interesting time. I don't think people necessarily have to feel guilty about that, but I think you should be open to hearing the other side of things, especially now that we are uncovering that there were probably astroturfing campaigns about this. Misogyny is baked into our human experience, whether we realize it or not. It's affecting how we're viewing the world and how we're interacting with the world. But the time for the media spectacle is over. Let's talk about facts. Like I said, that article has links and stuff. There's all like evidence and proof in there as well. So Amber Heard met Johnny Depp on the set of a movie. She was 23 and he was 46. Yeah. So at 23, you're definitely like approaching peak brain development. You still have some way to go, but you're not necessarily a baby anymore. When evaluating age gap relationships, I think the conversation is so annoying because I feel like people are either on one extreme where they don't care at all, they don't want to examine that there might be a dynamic there, or they think every single age gap is wrong, even if somebody's like 60 and their husband is 42 or something like that. Like, so this age gap I personally am not a fan of, but there would probably be people that are like, oh, I don't think in it of itself it has to be bad. And I'm like, okay, but even if you're not considering the age gap in this relationship, there still are a lot of power dynamics at play. Wage inequality and levels of fame being 2 major ones. Like Johnny Depp was a huge actor. He's already had decades of success by the time that they meet. And Amber Heard is a young actor. She had been in things before, but there is going to be a power dynamic there regardless. She probably grew up watching his movies. Like there's a power dynamic there. And again, power dynamics don't necessarily have to lead to abuse. There might be a situation where somebody falls in love with their boss and they go about it the right way and like it's a beautiful story and whatever, but those are usually exceptions to the rule, and I don't think that that's the case here in particular. Even though Johnny Depp was sober when they first met, he soon fell off the wagon, and Amber was caught in the crossfire of his battle with his own demons, something that also has been documented, his substance abuse, for a long time. And loving someone who is in active addiction is extremely hard. It's why they have programs that are created for loved ones of addicts specifically, like Al-Anon is for loved ones, whereas something like AA is for like addicts themselves. Just the roller coaster of emotions that happen in relationships that are already abusive without substance abuse, that's already a thing to deal with, but substances create like a whole other level of chaoticness that it's just really difficult. It emphasizes in certain ways. It's not saying one is worse or better than the other, it's just a different experience. Like the highs and lows can be that much more intense because substances, a lot of addicts, when they talk about their experiences, they talk about having very high highs and very low lows. So when you have that in an abusive relationship dynamic, probably definitely going to affect things. Addiction is also a risk factor that can contribute to the likeliness to abuse. That's not to say that all addicts are abusers, because there are a lot of risk factors that are identified in having the potential to become abusive or have abusive traits. Addiction, though, is making all of your qualities that much worse. It's taking things to that extreme. So it is possible for addiction to be a catalyst for somebody to become abusive. And again, that's not an excuse. It's just like kind of like where their behavior is coming from. That's definitely a them problem. It's not for you to worry about, and for those who have been through it, right there with you, it's a very isolating experience because there aren't a lot of people that have experienced it. And if there are, it's not something that people commonly talk about, because you kind of have the weird thing where it's like, this is someone's addiction story, so you kind of feel weird about like talking about it, but you shouldn't. Like, it's also your story too. People have the mentality of addiction being a choice instead of a disease, even though like it is a disease. So then they think of people who are with addicts, that is like an active choice as well. We're already questioning people. I mean, not we, but like people in general question those who stay with abusers, saying like, why didn't you just leave, and things like that. But when you add something that's as stigmatized as drugs are in the United States, it adds just another layer of misunderstanding. Drug use is pretty prevalent and normalized in the United States, but there still is like a very strong, and I think it's because of like the DARE program and all of that, there's still a very strong like anti-drug, like if you do drugs, you are bad type of mentality that Americans have. Because these vices are seen as active choices, therefore addiction is the active choice in their mind. So again, it's not why are you choosing to be with an abuser, it's also why are you choosing to be with an addict who is an abuser. And then of course, your partner who is supposed to be there and supposed to care for you when no one else is there is the one that is causing you pain, but it's also complicated because it's like, you know that they're sick and that this isn't necessarily them. Like it is and it isn't. You're telling yourself like, this person that they are currently right now is not who they are. I know who they are. It's this person that's been lost along the way. I just have to dig and I have to find it. But you can't do that alone. And your partner is not equipped right now because of what they're dealing with to grab a shovel and to help you dig that out. Again, there are some relationships that can survive addiction, but it's very, very difficult because of, it's like two people are in a partnership, but because of this dynamic, they're both going through their own like mental things. And it's just not, if they need to heal, sometimes being together, it's just not possible. And I shouldn't say sometimes, I should say most of the time, that is the case. And yeah, it's just one of the most isolating things to experience. And so I wanted to talk about it just because I also have experience with it. And I also think that some of the reaction to the Amber Heard trial, Johnny Depp trial, whatever you want to call it, is because a lot of people just don't know what these dynamics are like because they haven't experienced them, which lucky you, or maybe they have and they just haven't done the work to realize what has been going on. So for people who actually watched the trial from an objective point of view, there's no other way really to see what happened beyond the truth. Johnny Depp's an abuser and he used a civil court and the media to abuse Amber for the final time. Like I said, there's links and stuff with evidence. Go read it. Go consume media that isn't just based on shock and entertainment. Read the court transcripts yourself so that you can form your own opinion. There are also videos out there that expand on this trial from a more balanced and realistic lens, so you can watch those as well. Go read the judgment for the UK trial because it's used a lot of the same evidence, and that one happened before the US trial. But the trial itself, the minutiae of all of that, is again not what this video is about. This trial was a catalyst for abusers gaining more and more social power as revenge, what I think, for the Me Too movement. And then this year, 2024, again, year of misogyny, I just feel like abusers and creeps were all over the news, and it wasn't just men that were doing it either, because you have Jay-Z that just came out, and obviously as a result of all the P. Diddy stuff that's been coming out, Dr. Disrespect, we finally found out why he got kicked off Twitch after years of not knowing. The Ava Tyson stuff was coming out. Colleen Ballinger's still making videos. There's this women's college basketball star named Sedona who had her ex-girlfriends expose her on TikTok that I saw on the Do We Know Them podcast. That was insane. Cody Ko was also a thing that happened this year. And then two figures that we're going to talk about in detail today is Logan Portenier from Observe and ImAlexx. So the Johnny Depp trial will have and has had lasting effects on how victims are going to be able to come forward. A precedent has been set that men can take their accusers to court for defamation and win. And we already have such a problem believing victims in the first place. We have historically, especially if we don't see them as a perfect victim, and then that's just increased tenfold. A woman speaking out about any abuser now is going to be seen as an Amber Heard. And so originally this video was going to be about the allegations towards the body language YouTuber Observe, aka Logan Portenier, that came out earlier this year that I wasn't seeing anyone talk about at the time. I teased the thumbnail in my community tab, like everything, like I was ready to make this video, and then life was happening. This year was quite the roller coaster. I completely lost myself in general. So I lost focus on the story. I was keeping up with it here and there, just in my personal time, but I wasn't actively researching it for a while. I didn't forget about it, certainly did not forget about it. I was just unsure if I wanted to bring it back up because of how unfairly and poorly that Piper, Logan's ex-spouse, was treated. I thought that was really disgusting, and so it kind of made me want to bring this story back up a little bit, but also tie it into this larger narrative so that it's not targeted by people who want to silence Piper specifically. And then men just kept getting outed as abusers more and more as the year went on, so that's why I also wanted to package this into a wider narrative.
You know me from the YouTube channel Observe with Logan Portenier. Today I'm divorcing him, and I'm literally at the courthouse. I will be there in an hour, and he will be appearing remotely through Zoom, and I will be divorced and free to speak on who he is, because who he is a fucking monster. He is a gaslighting, abusive, manipulative, lying monster.
So before Piper posted this initial video, they had already been public about things that have happened to them. This is a fact. The blog post that I'm almost 100% positive was posted in October of 2023, and I'll explain why I think that in a second, where Piper talks about how they started posting stuff to social media in January of 2023, and Logan was like, "You're making me look bad, stop doing that." We don't have screenshots of like what was posted at the time or of Logan saying, "Hey, leave me alone." But in this article that was written in October of 2023, Piper mentions it, and him asking them to take stuff down just kind of tracks with their story. So this blog post was definitely posted in October 2023. It's just not timestamped with the year, and I don't know how to get into like web pages and figure out when something was published and all this stuff. But the reason why I think it was that is because October 2024, like Piper had already come out and been villainized by a lot of commentary channels, and now has kind of moved on from it. So it wouldn't make sense for it to have just come out. Plus, also, I saw this article, not when I was re-researching recently, but this was an article that I saw back when I was researching initially at the beginning of the year. So I think Piper came out with these initial videos maybe February or March of 2024. Yes, just so we have the timelines there. So this first blog post is the most detailed. It's also the first detailed account of Piper's story. The story never changes. That is a fact. Details are sometimes added. Sometimes retellings of the story will leave things out. That's just how it works when you're telling stories. And if the story was perfectly verbatim every single time, then you would be suspicious about that as well. A lot of the backlash that Piper received for telling their story was saying that it was just a bad relationship or that there's no proof. So I'm going to address those claims, how those claims specifically are harmful to accusers of, or people who are victims and have become public accusers. But anyway, you need context. What are we even talking about? So you're like, Observe? An abuser? What are we talking about? How did I miss this? Because like I mentioned, there just wasn't a lot of coverage about this at the time. And the coverage that there was not favorable to Piper at all. It didn't paint it in a light that I think is accurate, in my opinion. Logan was 21, attending a Bible college, on track to become a pastor. Piper's about to turn 19, working at a nearby coffee shop when they meet. Piper talks about how the beginning of the relationship, there's a lot of love bombing going on that they were excited about because they had never experienced interests like that before. And as someone who also got into a toxic relationship at 19, when you're young and you haven't experienced stuff like that before, and someone's love bombing, it's very easy to not recognize that that's what's happening. They date for a couple years, and then they get married. And Piper talks a lot about the sexual abuse in their relationship, and I have never felt more seen in my life. Because again, this is something that people don't talk about at all. And I think that contributes to why people didn't really understand Piper's story and why they were not quick to believe Piper's story, which is unfortunate. And the type of sexual abuse that we're talking about is like constant denial and like complete removal of intimacy, only wants it when they want it, and you feel like you have to say yes. So basically, before they get married, there's all this love and desire in the air, like, I can't wait for our wedding night, blah, blah. You know, they're Christians, they're not having sex before marriage. But then on the wedding night, Logan says to his new spouse, why would you think I would want to have sex with you right now? Or something along those lines, which is actually diabolical. Because the most annoying part of experiencing sexual abuse like this is the person is painting you as a sex addict. Like, that's all you want from me. That's something that my ex said to me multiple times, was like, I feel like this is all you want from me. What the fuck? But then they also try to like make it about consent, because obviously no one owes you sex or consent or anything, not even when you're in a relationship. But like I said, they take away all intimacy. So even if you want a hug, in my experience, that's even like that's burdensome to them. And then what happens, because it's an abuse dynamic, you have highs and lows, so they will act like they want you now. They'll try to flirt with you and initiate finally. They're giving you what you want finally. It's breadcrumbing is what it is. And because they've broken you down so much for months at a time or however long at a time, you're like, well, I think I can only say yes because it is something that I'm asking for over and over and over again, and then I'm finally getting it, but so I feel like I have to. But anytime I try to communicate my needs, initiate myself, or have anything remotely resembling a healthy, intimate relationship, I would get demonized. You can't talk about any of this. There's no problem. What are you talking about?
When I was in my relationship with him, he was incredibly psychologically, emotionally, mentally, physically, and sexually abusive to me. He would bait me throughout the day with flirtatious texts and then accuse me of being a sex addict when I would try to initiate sex with him. And then he would initiate at the worst times when I was emotionally down or had been manipulated by him, or he was love bombing, and then he would initiate sex and knew that I would give in. So he, under psychological duress, would trick me into having sex with him. So he raped me over and over and over again over years.
Even when I'm describing it, it's so hard to explain what that's like. Because it's like, oh, your partner didn't want to have sex with you, but it's not that. It's like isolation and mind games, and it's so weird. Again, it is weird for people who have never experienced before, but it is something that happens. Like, that's not just a shitty relationship. That's not normal. This is not what a healthy, intimate relationship looks like. It's a form of sexual abuse, in my opinion, even though it's not officially recognized by the law because of how complicated it is. But the psychological and a lot of the physical impacts on the victim are going to be the same. And then they also gaslight you into thinking that you're the abuser because you're pestering them for sex all the time. You're a sex pest, which is a gross mischaracterization of what's actually happening. Abusers also often will be like, no, you're the abuser, all the time as well. So that's also classic. This is abuse. This is sexual abuse that happens in relationships. In the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, there's a 2005 article that discusses everything we know about violence against women and how it's recognized as a public health crisis internationally. They break violence down into 3 different categories: physical, mental / emotional / psychological, all the brain stuff grouped into one, and then sexual, of course. These categories can often overlap. Sexual violence is defined as, this is a quote, forceful sex acts through the use of physical force, threats, and intimidation, forced participation in degrading sexual acts, denied use of contraceptives to prevent pregnancy or STIs, ... So within that threats and intimidation aspect, coercion is included in there, and then the article goes on to further define what coercion is: the act of forcing or attempting to force another through violence, threats, verbal insistence, deception, cultural expectations, economic circumstances to engage in unwanted sexual contact. So, verbal insistence and deception, which is what I would call exactly what these people do. In Piper's case, There could also be a religious component, so cultural expectations as well is in there. Again, there's the denial that intimacy is an issue at all. They are turning you into the problem. Then they switch up and start convincing you to have sex with them. And then as the victim, again, it's like, do I really want to have sex with this person that makes me feel like shit? No, I don't at all. But you're so starved for intimacy, and not just sex, intimacy in general, because after the love bombing periods, everything is taken away from you. So even if you would just prefer to cuddle or even spend quality time together, you'll settle for having sex with them because they want it, because at least it's something. At least you get to feel close to them. But it's not intimacy at all. It's not intimate. The person who's supposed to love you is basically using you to jerk off and shut you up for a little bit. So if you're watching this video and you relate to this, but you never thought about your experiences in that way, I know exactly how you feel. Please take care of yourself. It's a lot. It was very difficult for me to come to terms with that fact as well, where I'm like, oh my God, every single experience that I had was actually not as consensual as I thought it was, which is a wild conclusion to draw. But the reason why you don't know that it was at the time is because people don't talk about this, and none of it is your fault. And you're not alone. Like, this is a thing that people experience, and don't let anybody tell you that it's not real. Piper also suffers from endometriosis, and while taking care of a partner who is going through something difficult physically or mentally, it is hard on the person that's taking care of them, but that doesn't excuse literal abuse. Like, if you have a caretaker role towards the person that you're with, especially married, where you have like an obligation, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're also taking care of yourself, that you're setting boundaries that you need to. Abusers will overemphasize the bare minimum that they do for their partners in these situations and act like they will also make you feel bad about it. Because yes, it is hard on them, but also it's not healthy for you to make your partner feel like a burden. Like, that's something that you need to work out in therapy, to either like help your mind be at ease at it, or to support you through saying, hey, maybe I'm just not equipped for this relationship, in a healthy way. Like, there are ways beyond abuse to deal with these issues. So Piper describes Logan as constantly making them feel bad about needing help, but also while acting like he's doing a good deed, which again is very typical.
He used my illness, endometriosis, against me. He led me into psychosis with the way he was treating me. I experienced psychosis almost every day for nearly a year because of the way he was treating me. And he didn't give a fuck. He didn't care. He would do whatever he wanted, do to me whatever he wanted, didn't care at all what was happening to me mentally or emotionally or physically. I was a burden to him. He would tell me that he couldn't be mad at a concept of my illness. He had to be mad at me. He, near the end of our relationship, said that it was no longer his responsibility to pay for my well-being, but he wouldn't allow me to get a job. When I would say, I'll get a job, he would say, how would that make me look making a disabled person work? And this would be after he would scream at me, like literally in my face, scream at me for hours saying, you do nothing, you provide nothing, I do everything for you, you do absolutely nothing. And I would say, okay, I'll go get a job. And then he would respond with that. And I never had access to our money, never, other than grocery shopping. And even then, most of the time it was declined. He would not get me food when I was trapped on the couch or in bed because of my illness. He would just let me go hungry or thirsty because he was busy. And how dare I ask him?
It's because the power dynamic is fueling the abusive person's behavior. The through line for all those theories that we talked about earlier, which is why I brought them up in the first place, is power. Whether it's the nature stuff, the nurture stuff, or any of the other stuff that we talked about earlier, the feminist theory, power is a through line through all of those. So again, this is not just a shitty relationship. This is an abusive dynamic, objectively. But what about proof? I could get into a whole thing about how, like, there's a difference between criminal wrong and moral wrong. People are allowed to have opinions about moral wrongs without having to worry about legality and court evidence and all that. The court of public opinion does not have to have the same standards as the court of law does. And I think that's fine. I think that's actually preferred. I personally don't have the same threshold for what I believe to be proof of abuse that a court would. And I think that is normal, and it should be that way. And again, this is also an abolitionist channel, so I don't think the answer to eradicating sexual abuse is to incarcerate and prosecute more people because recidivism is super high for abusers anyway. It's hard to rehabilitate them. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's not the solution either. It's not, let's get more people prosecuted. That's not the solution. I don't think the function of cancel culture in the court of public opinion has to prosecute people essentially where the state does not. I don't think that's the function of it. I think that's what people think they're doing, and that's the motivation for a lot of people, but I don't think that's what that role should be. I think what the court of public opinion is important for and can be used for is to raise awareness when the justice system is failing. So everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? We can't be shocked when our public actions have public opinions about them. And criminal actions are something that is of public interest. So when someone tells their story, like Amber, like Piper, like Alice that we'll talk about in a moment, and it matches abuse dynamics that we know, like it's a tale as old as time, like I mentioned before. It matches some of my own lived experiences, things that I've seen people around me experience, like that is something that also will reinforce in my mind that something is real or not, whatever. And also if the accused has no real debunking out there. For the court of my opinion, those things are enough for me to say, hey, this person sucks and I probably don't want anything to do with them. People don't get canceled. It's not a thing, especially people in positions of privilege and power. Someone telling their story and saying that they don't think someone deserves a platform is not like demanding that you get hung in the streets or whatever. The abuser is just gonna be just fine. We know this historically. So making content trying to debunk an accuser and you truly don't know anything about their experience is not productive. You're not protecting anyone in that situation. You're hurting someone who has most likely been abused. It's fine to have a conversation, it's fine to have questions, it's fine to do all of that. I don't think being overly naive and overly accepting is the solution either. But most of the time when you see these people have reactions to victims coming forward, those detractors make just as many assumptions about the situation that they think that the person is lying about. And also, what is proof of abuse? Piper did post some text messages before, but it didn't really go over well because emotional abuse in particular is very hard to prove unless they're hurling insults and expletives like ImAlexx was doing in the evidence that we saw from him. Again, we'll get to that in a second. If it's not that, then it's hard. Then it's hard for people to understand it without the context of being in that relationship, which I think is fine. But also, we need to recognize that from being outside of the relationship, we don't know everything about those dynamics. Like, if people saw snippets of me and texts, or me and my texts with my ex, they might think that I was the aggressor in some situations as well, because he would lie to me and gaslight me, and I would call him out and get angry, and then I would be accused of the one that's being, not letting things go and all of that. That's what abusers do. Psychological abuse just doesn't come across over text in the same way if you're not the person that is the target of that abuse. And there's not a lot of physical evidence of abuse either. It's really difficult when you have physical abuse cases or sexual abuse cases. There can be physical evidence, but it's also rare for that to happen. And in the court of law, people do get falsely accused of things all the time because our justice system is poor. Not inadvertently, what's the word I'm looking for? There's unequal prosecution for people of color versus white people. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. That is a thing, obviously. And because of that, the level of proof in a court of law has to be high. Understandably, especially with our justice system being as shitty as it is, I would prefer that people aren't getting falsely convicted. So I understand why burden of proof is high in criminal trials. But you as a human being who is not a judge or on the jury pool should not need to have that level of proof to be a human being, to listen to another human being's story. I just think that's fucked. And I hope you understand what I mean, that I'm not just saying, believe everybody. I think you do. There's something in the middle there. And I don't know. I just think if your burden of proof is so high to believe people, you are weird. Because also believing somebody doesn't mean that you have to go out and be an attack dog for this accuser, towards their abuser. That's probably not what they even want, You can believe Piper's story and you can be like, oh yeah, I guess like that's awful for you or whatever. And maybe you can even separate it and still watch his videos. I personally wouldn't do that. So like, why do you feel the need to attack somebody who is potentially a victim? Who's winning in that situation? Besides somebody who's potentially an abuser. But also we can look at some of what Logan himself puts out there. Give us an idea about who he is. I highly recommend watching, how do you pronounce it? Mooncat? I think her video about body language analysis for a lot more detail, but body language is analysis in the way that it's done in these types of videos is not real. It's a pseudoscience. Sorry. Body language is incredibly difficult to study because of how unique we all are. So actual scientific studies are very limited on it. Sure, there are some things that you can determine via body language. Yeah, that's called a social cue. But the level of study that these guys pretend to do is basically just like a bunch of confident white men, frankly, just spewing it unchecked. Body language analysis often supports racism, ableism, sexism. We saw this with the Depp trial, also with the internet hating Brie Larson, like Charisma on Command and other videos that were made about her back in the Brie Larson hating days. And yeah, Mooncat gives a bunch more proof and everything that they're saying, or more proof to back up everything that I'm saying. These are just like the overall points that were made in the video. So like I said, you should go watch it if you're like, what do you mean it's not real? That video will tell you more than I have time for right now. And Piper has also opened up about Logan using his body language analyzing skills in his love bombing initially, and then also later in his abuse.
He has no credentials for what he does. He has made up all of his experience. None of it is real. He's never trained anyone. He's never worked on any cases. He's never, anything he says that he's done, he's never done it. He's never even taken the master's course that he promotes.
Also, Observe had a really weird take on the Gabby Petito situation when she was still missing. So that, you know, that body cam footage that came out while we all thought that she was still missing and were hoping that we would find her, and where anybody with a brain could see that she was very clearly being abused. Observe did not have that opinion at the time. That video ended up having to get taken down because he got backlash for it. So because that video was taken down, I could only really find some Reddit comments that talked about his shitty takes. I'm pretty sure I saw the video at the time. Like, I do remember that. I'm pretty sure I didn't even watch it all the way through. I saw kind of what he was doing. I was like, oh, I don't know about this. And Logan has not really debunked much of Piper's accusations in general, which I guess shouldn't automatically be a red flag, but listen, men have all the power in these situations. So if you truly have proof that you're the one in the right, why would you not say anything about it? Like, there are people who have done this successfully. In talking about ImAlexx, the whole Slazo situation, he was able to come out and debunk everything that was being accused, or that he was being accused of. And also Quite is a YouTuber who had similar stuff that he had to clear up, which he was successful in doing so. So it's possible. If you truly are innocent, it is possible for people to see your innocence. And because you're the man in the situation and you have the power, people are going to listen to you if you have things to defend yourself. So when you only have one person presenting their case and the other person doesn't even want to get into it, that's a deliberate choice that they're making. But if you don't have proof that you were in the right, or if you were the one in the wrong and you don't want to admit it, then your best course of action would be to ignore it or put yourself above it all, saying like, oh, people are saying things about me, but I just don't have time for drama, or allude to things that they can't say for various reasons. Like, oh, I can't talk much about this now, but if only you knew what was happening behind the scenes, things like that. Logan is not pursuing Piper legally at this time, nor has he at all, besides their divorce proceedings, obviously. And then there was more to the story, like there's a polyamory and cheating arc with Logan's employee, and I had to cut all of that out because it got a little bit off topic from some of the other stuff. And I just feel like when polyamorous people talk about cheating that happens or abuse that happens, what is this bug? How did it get in here? No one wants to listen because they don't understand how those relationships work. Like, oh, you chose to be polyamorous, so why are you complaining that it's messy? Because obviously, even though like but that's just a whole other tangent that I don't have the bandwidth for right now. But please go read Piper's entire statement. But what happens when you have all the evidence in the world? You have commentary YouTuber ImAlexx, who was exposed by his ex-girlfriend Alice, and other ex-girlfriends came out after that, of horrific abuse. I won't have to go as in depth into the accusations of this one because this did receive a lot of coverage, unlike Piper's story that I mentioned earlier. I won't have to do a play-by-play. I'm not gonna play any of the audio that was released. There are already so many videos about this topic, and they're also, the audio files themselves are in Alice's Google Doc statement, which I will have below, of course, as well in my resources. But I guess like it's understandable that people use them. People need, like, that's important to have, especially the files were hitting view limits when it first came out, so some people didn't have access to it. My cat is fighting me. But for me, the coverage at some point became kind of trauma porny to me. Did anybody else feel that way? But I think the video I'm gonna link about it as a good summary by Angelica Oles, and it's a good summary of the situation. Watching women talk about this is important, I think, but also Angelica is a UK YouTuber, and that community knows a lot about each other. They've met each other in person. It's kind of like all the streamers that live in LA. It's like a coworker environment. It's as close as you can get to in this online environment. But anyway, I think Angelica added clips to her video in a very tasteful way where it told the story but didn't feel like it was lingering too much. Also, the episode of the Do We Know Them podcast I think was done well as well. And I'm sure there are other YouTubers that did cover it responsibly. Those were just the two that I felt safe watching and that I did watch all the way through, and then I'm like, I have to take a step back. I can't watch more videos about this stuff. But I did see someone comment on Angelica's video about how there were male commentary YouTubers who were like, I don't know, man, this abuse could have gone both ways, which really shocked me because I felt like this was more like, okay, yeah, we believe you, than I have ever really seen for the most part. Maybe I'm just wrong because of those sources that I was looking at. And it's just crazy because, again, you can have all this evidence in the world and still people won't believe you. That's insane to me. I thought that the slop channels, that their narrative was just going to be like focusing on him being a hypocrite for the Slazo stuff. But if those slop channels are like seriously questioning that this was abuse, like that is the biggest self-report I've seen from them in a long time. Like, that's crazy. This was almost undeniable. I'm pretty sure I didn't even see Keemstar saying stuff like that, but maybe he did and I just missed it. I don't know. Anyway, that's why I try to stay away from that side of the internet, so I don't know what weird stuff they're talking about, because how? I don't understand. There's so much evidence. Anyway, Alice is the first ex-girlfriend who spoke up about the abuse that she suffered at the hands of Alex and provided a wealth of evidence for everything that happened to her, which is so rare. Just tons of text messages showing his insane behavior, calling her names, threatening violence, spamming her phone to try to get her to answer. So much awful shit, and the video recordings are exactly the same. And then there's also one where he's crying and groveling and trying to get her to take him back, which she doesn't do. Slay queen. And violence also escalated to physical abuse before Alice was able to break free from him. That's the most succinct way to describe it. But again, it's not doing justice for just how vile it was, which again, you probably already know because the story was huge. And we only saw a fraction of receipts of this relationship. Could you imagine if she posted like every single thing? Or, you know, imagine things that she wasn't able to document, or things that she might have not even felt safe sharing to the world. Like, she did share a lot, but for me, I know I've shared some of the stuff that I've gone through. I didn't go through every single detail. There's still some stuff that I just like are only for me to deal with. So it's probably even way more horrific than we've even been exposed to, which is crazy. So there's a trend in all these cases that we talked about today where the victim is finding some small way to fight back, which blew up in Amber Heard's face. It's provided an opportunity for people to doubt Piper and doubt Alice. Both Piper and Alice actually like felt the need to talk about the fact that they're taking some responsibility for like stuff that they did. Like, oh yeah, and then also I yelled at him and I felt bad, and like stuff like that. They bring that stuff up in their posts because they know that that is something that abusers will use to negate your story. But reactive abuse is not real. Because abuse in and of itself requires holding power over another person. An abuser has all the control, all the power in a relationship. And unhealthy behavior certainly can stem from both parties. It's not healthy to just yell back at somebody and to make them feel just as bad as you feel. That's not healthy, but abuse specifically requires that very specific dynamic. And I think the rigidity of the legal system, like I've been talking about, is also an explanation for this mentality. Oh, well, they both did bad things, so they're both bad. And it's also, again, a case of people using legality for their own moral compass. And it's hard for something that's black and white, like our justice system, to be able to make just judgments on the nuances of situations, which every situation is. Because if you blatantly say, blanket, like, any victim of crime, you basically get immunity from however you retaliate, that's not really going to work in the system that we have set up either. That's definitely that's going to fail people as well. So, and it's just so interesting to have the self-defense crowd suddenly switch up when the person defending themselves is being abused. Because again, while it may not make the legal requirement for self-defense, neither do a lot of these situations where this crowd claims it. And the courts notoriously will grant self-defense to certain people over others, like George Zimmerman, for example, Kyle Rittenhouse, for another example. And entertaining the idea that mutual abuse exists allows abusers to blame shift, which we know that they do as well. There's a ton of empirical evidence about it and a lot of anecdotal evidence as well. And there definitely are abusers who like consciously know that they're tormenting people and that's what it is to them that they like. But I think what's more common is that abusers are clouded by their own issues and they convince themselves that what they're doing is right. And so they don't see what they're doing as abuse. So of course they're going to shift blame. Because if somebody their entire life has felt like everyone's against me, blah, 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 and so when they're in a relationship, they try to take some of that power back and they become abusive, they're not going to understand that that's what they're doing necessarily. They might understand that how they're treating somebody is wrong, but they don't understand like where that's coming from. So what do we do about all of this? I am becoming super jaded. I kind of want to just burn it all down so we can rebuild a proper society. But because that won't happen, at least not in my lifetime, what else can we do? I think obviously change within our own communities, having these discussions, people, especially men, need to be open to learning more about this stuff. Like there's literal science behind it. Even if other areas are lacking in more study, hey, maybe we should invest more into it, right? Yeah, good chance of that. But as I mentioned in the beginning, misogyny is deeply woven into our society. So men, specifically cis men, need to do the work. And it is actual work. And I feel like, especially on the left, we've kind of abandoned these feminist principles as our focus moves to all these other things that are going wrong in the world, which yes, but also I feel like we've kind of been like, oh, well, we did that already, so now we can focus on some other stuff, which is not the case. And for men out there, it's not just about proclaiming that you're one of the good ones. Show your work. What are you doing? Do you call out your friends? Are you an ally in your community? And allyship is action. It's a title that you aspire to, sure, but it's a title that is granted to you by the people that you are helping. So how are you showing up for them to deserve that title? So the final article that I want to share, which is the other must read, is a 2012 article in an edition of Trauma, Violence, and Abuse, that journal. The article is called Turning Points for Perpetrators of Intimate Partner Violence, which uses theory of change to examine when abusers are most susceptible to being able to change, basically most susceptible to rehabilitation. So the most common form of punishment in the US for domestic violence is maybe not even jail time, especially for a first offense. You are probably gonna have to take a class, and these classes are not very effective. The statistics are not good. They don't really work that well. And this is probably because of what we know about change. So there are two theories of change that I saw referenced in not just this article, but a couple of articles that I was reading about this. And it's not just used for domestic violence, it's used for a lot of ways when we think about change and rehabilitation. So we have the trans-theoretical model and protection motivation theory. And the trans-theoretical model shows like the stages of change from pre-contemplating that change, contemplating that change, preparing to change, taking action and making that change, maintaining that change over time, termination, which is you have changed, or relapse, and then you go through the whole thing again. And then the protection model theory basically describes all the different variables that can influence that desire or ability to change, which includes vulnerability, severity, response efficacy, self-efficacy, and cost. So basically, being able to perceive that your behavior is wrong, understanding the severity of the negative consequences of that behavior that you've done, the belief that you'll be able to change by adhering to whatever the plan is for that change, like taking an anger management class or whatever, believing in yourself to have the capacity to change, and then also the variables are like all the barriers that are standing in the way of creating that change. This study that's in this 2012 article uses theory of change as a background to determine where can we find the turning point that leads abusers to change. So they examined why did I say three when 6 is literally written right here? They examined 6 studies, and the underlying theme of all of them was that perpetrators who change are ones that take responsibility for their actions, and they feel that their decision to change was autonomous, that it came from themselves. 5 out of 6 studies show that developing new skills was helpful to facilitate change. Again, therapy, anger management classes, things like that, which I feel like is a given. And then in 2 of the 6 studies, having positive relationships with people who are also going through that change was beneficial as well. So this is mirroring some things that we see in addiction recovery. So there is some hope here that people are able to change, but our system is not built to address this properly. And so I don't think the system is how we're going to solve it. Because our society, it's a patriarchal society. Again, it does not benefit men to be allied to women. There's not an incentive for abusers to change. And at the end of the day, everything falls back to living in the American hellscape. Oh, wow. That was like 12 pages, but I'm back. Oh, shit, I got... this a little bit better. I worked myself so much this year that I had several mental breakdowns and ended up getting fired the week before Thanksgiving. So now I can make content at least, so that's fun. I have a whole new motivation though to do this. But what, can you stop please? Like this video if you liked it, and then you can subscribe for more videos from me because they are coming, I promise. Yeah, I don't want to make any promises about schedules and stuff like that because I've done that before and that has not gone over well. So I'll just say that I'll be back really soon. I'm excited to be making stuff again. I have some things that I'm working on right now, and yeah, so I will see you later. Bye.